Good afternoon and welcome to today's Downing Street press conference. Now let me start with the daily update on the latest data on coronavirus. Today we had 1,056 new cases. There are 395 people in critical care and 38 people have very sadly died. I think it's also worth noting the week-on-week data, which compares Friday the 5th of June with Friday the 12th of June, just to give you a sense of the trend and the progress that we're making. There were, against the 5th of June versus the 12th of June, 109 fewer daily cases. There were 161 fewer patients in critical care in our hospitals and 155 fewer deaths. That's important progress on the week before as we continue step by step and week by week to bring the incidence of coronavirus down. In addition, as of today, there have been 6,866,481 tests for coronavirus carried out or posted out in the United Kingdom, and that includes 93,163 tests carried out or posted out yesterday. This is the progress, the evidence, the basis on which we're able to progress along the roadmap which the Prime Minister set out on the 11th of May. We're taking steady steps at each stage, and our progress is based on strict conditions. We're very carefully monitoring the impact they have on the virus. And it's thanks to the hard work of the British people that we've seen the level of the virus brought down substantially. At the same time, we're watching the impact of every change that we make very closely so that we can monitor the trends and make sure that every step we take is as safe as possible. In terms of those steps, the most recent steps that we've taken, on Saturday, we took measures to allow individual prayer at places of worship. In order to support the loneliest and some of the most vulnerable in our society, we've also allowed single adult households to form support bubbles with one other household. And all of those in any support bubble are able to act as if they're living in the same household, including spending time in each other's homes without the requisite social distancing measures applying. And I know that these modest steps will provide enormous relief to many people who have been isolated from their loved ones for weeks on end now. Today, we're taking further steps to reopen British high streets, to get our economy motoring again, to protect jobs and livelihoods. And we'll also allow outdoor attractions to open where people can stay in their cars, like safari parks and drive-in cinemas. As we explained back on the 11th of May, these are modest and careful steps. But with each step we take, we can monitor their effect on the transmission of COVID-19 in the country, keep the virus under control as we open up step by step, and build public confidence in the transition that we're making. And I say that because we can't just pretend that coronavirus has gone away or we've eliminated the virus. We know from the science and also from what we're seeing from international experience that there is a risk of a second spike if we're not very careful at this moment in time. So we need to keep up the social distancing, we need to keep building up and reinforcing the test and tracing regime, and we need to continue our steady progress in repressing the virus as we try to get life back to something like normal. Bayes and the Treasury are working very closely with businesses, large and small, right across the country, so that they're able to meet the COVID-secure guidelines before they reopen. And just to give you a sense of what that will look like in practice, in local shops, as we've already seen with essential retail, you'll see one-way floor markings and signs. You'll see hand sanitizing stations, and there will be limits on the number of people in any one shop at any one time. So it's very much a managed process. Starting today, we've also made it mandatory to wear a face covering when using public transport. And we also advise people to use a face covering in any place where they can't be sure that they'll be able to adhere to the social distancing guidelines. And at the same time today, we continue to incrementally bring more of our children back to school. We started with primary schools welcoming more children back on the 1st of June, and today secondary schools will start to provide some face-to-face time between teachers and students in years 10 and 12. So that's where we are as of today, and as I said, we'll monitor the effect of these changes very carefully. That's the way we can keep the downward pressure on coronavirus and build up public confidence, so we're in the best position that we possibly can be to take the third step along our roadmap, which will happen no earlier than the 4th of July. We're sticking to our plan. We're making good progress every week, and we'll only take the necessary next steps when we can be confident that it's safe to do so. Now I'll talk through the data slides that we have up on the screen. If I could have the first slide, please. So you can see from the first slide, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk through this data today is it can show the trend that I was talking about in my opening remarks. And the first slide shows cases confirmed with a test. So in total, we've got coming close to 7 million tests for coronavirus that have now been carried out or posted out in the UK, and that includes the 93,163 tests carried out or posted out yesterday. We can see also that nearly 300,000 people have tested positive, and that's just over 1,000 cases since yesterday. If I could have the second slide, please. Now, this shows the latest data from our hospitals. You can see that 430 people were admitted to hospital with coronavirus in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland on the 12th of June. And that's down from 515 a week earlier and down from a peak of 3,432 back on the 1st of April. So you get a sense of the trend and the progress we're making. 395 COVID-19 patients were in mechanical ventilation beds in the UK on the 12th of June, and that's down from 556 a week earlier and down from a peak of over 3,000 on the 12th of April. If I could have the third slide, please. Now, this shows the regional breakdown for what's happening in our hospitals across the country. There are now 5,507 people in hospitals with coronavirus in the UK. That's down 19% from 6,826 a week ago and down from a peak of over 20,000 on the 12th of April. And as the graph shows, there's some regional variation, but most nations and most regions of the UK are broadly following a pretty similar pattern. And if I could have the final slide, please. Now, this shows the daily figures for those who have very sadly lost their lives after testing positive for coronavirus. And I think the most interesting feature is the yellow line, the 7-day rolling average, which shows that the daily number of deaths currently stands at 163. That's down from a peak of 943 on the 14th of April. So we're not there yet. We're not out of the woods entirely, but we've made steady progress. And that's the basis, that's the evidence on which we could take the further steps that we took today as we come through this transition along the roadmap that the Prime Minister has set out. That's it from the slides. I think we'll now go to some questions, please. I think we've got, first up, Ollie from Newcastle-under-Lyme. Hi, Ollie. Can we have that question again? It was on mute, please. Ollie's asking when the UK's alert level will be at 1 or near to 1. Ollie, it's difficult to say for sure. We know it's down below 1. And the critical thing at this stage is as we open up schools, we open up businesses, is that with our test and trace mechanism, we keep a very close eye to make sure that we're controlling the virus and getting it down. We need to make sure we keep suppressing not just the incidence, but the transmission rate. That's in terms of the R level. And of course, the alert level will follow that. That's decided independently by the Biosecurity Centre, and we'll take their advice on the alert level, but that's not decided by the politicians. Next up, we've got Jude from Eastbourne. And Jude asks, what provision will be put in place for the children of key workers over the summer holidays if the schools won't be open? Our normal plans would be school holiday clubs, grandparents who live out of town, as well as holidays abroad to break up the 7-week summer holiday. And none of those options are currently available. Well, look, I'm sure, Jude, you speak to, for a lot of people. We're working with schools. We've provided extra money for some of the programs that can be provided over the recess period. Thousands of children will also receive extra support through our holiday activities and food programme, but it will be difficult, and we appreciate that there will be more challenges than we would normally have. But as I said before, as we open up schools and as children come back into using the facilities, and as we look at some of those wider offers that schools can make, we just got to be really careful that we give schools the lead time to prepare adequately, and also that we take these steps steadily and in a sure-footed way, so we don't see the virus take back hold over the country. Jude, thank you for that. And now I'll go to the media. Mark Easton from the BBC. Mark.
Good evening. Mr. Raab, the Prime Minister's response to the anger of the Black Lives Matter protests is an inquiry in the same unit the previous PM set up to answer the same question. Rather than yet another Whitehall committee, wouldn't it be more helpful to allow us to see immediately the official findings on why people from Black and other ethnic minorities are more likely to die from COVID-19?
Well, we do want to get to the bottom of that. We've commissioned more research on it. I think you'd agree that that needs to be handled very sensitively, but we are making sure we get to the bottom of it and got a clear view before we advise the public. We do also think, and the Prime Minister said, that it's important to set up the new commission on race and ethnic disparities. We want to affect positive change, and I don't accept that this is yet another review on top of the ones that have gone before. We have made progress. It's not enough. We're still restless to bring further change. But the Prime Minister ran his election campaign on a levelling up agenda. He's been talking about this issue, making sure we've got more equal opportunity right across the country, right across all of our communities since he's been Prime Minister, and indeed since the election campaign. And we have also made progress over the last 10 years. We've got a significant increase in the rates of BAME 18-year-olds going to university. Since 2011, we've seen Black pupils now 2.5 times more likely to enter core subjects at GCSE. And we're also acting on the Lammy review into the criminal justice system. So we've made progress, but it is important that we make further progress. And that's why the Prime Minister has set up that new commission. Do you want to come back, Mark, on that?
Well, I just want to ask you specifically about the details on why it is that Black and minority ethnic people are dying in far greater numbers proportionately than white people. I know it's something that worries an enormous number of people from those communities, but there are leaked reports going around. Why are some people allowed to see this stuff and we, and indeed ethnic minorities, are not?
Well, Mike, I think you've answered the question yourself. It's not right on a subject this sensitive, where we have not got the bottom of all the evidence, to start leaking snippets of it out. We want to make sure we've got a clearer understanding so that we can communicate it with practical advice for those involved, precisely because it's a very sensitive issue, and we want to give clear and reassuring guidance and not to have different people saying different things. So we will release as much information as we can, as soon as we practically can. But I think it's also important, people will expect that to come with practical advice. So we'll look at this very sensitively and make sure that once the further detail has been disclosed, we can do so with practical guidance and practical advice, which can give that reassurance. Mark, thanks very much. I'll go to Joel Hills at ITN.
Yeah, hello there. Mr. Raab, do you agree that the way British Airways is treating its workforce is a national disgrace?
We're going through a really challenging time. The government's provided a huge amount of support for businesses, large and small. And I think it's really important that we pull together and have a united team effort. We've seen that with the way the country feels about key workers, NHS staff and care workers. And I think it's incumbent on all businesses and all employers to try and do the very best they can to see, to maintain jobs and see employees through. Of course, it's in the last analysis, for individual employers and businesses to take those judgment calls, but we're certainly urging to keep as many of those jobs in place as possible. Do you want to come back on any of that, Joel?
I ask, if I could, I mean, it doesn't sound as if you have a view one way or another, but I ask because just over 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister told MPs on the liaison committee that he is aware of the situation at British Airways, and he said, we are actively looking at what we can do. What is the government going to do?
Well, we've done a huge amount already. There's been billions of pounds put into the job retention scheme. We provide direct support for businesses, both large and small. There are loan facilities. There are other, the furlough scheme, of course, as well. So, I mean, we've taken a range of steps. In terms of the airlines specifically, the Chancellor, of course, is looking very carefully at that. And I can tell you that from the Foreign Office's point of view, we put in £75 million into our charter flight scheme, which is primarily aimed at getting British nationals back from being stranded abroad. And that's something that the airlines, 14 airlines, benefited from as well.
Talk about British Airways very specifically. It's a clear question. If you could just answer it, please. What does the government plan to do, if anything, about the situation at British Airways?
Joel, as I'm explaining to you very clearly, step by step, ultimately it will be for businesses to decide how they navigate through this challenge. But as I've set out, we've provided a huge amount of support. And I know that the Chancellor and the Treasury are looking very carefully at all of the vulnerable sectors as we come through what is undoubtedly a very difficult time. Joel, thank you very much. Beth Rigby from Sky.
Thank you. Secretary of State, on the matter of this new Equality Commission, your colleague Nasrat Ghani said today, we have the data on obstacles, prejudice and inequalities. We just need to crack on with real practical solutions which will have a positive impact. But instead of getting on with it and implementing the 250 recommendations you already have from a clutch of reviews, the PM's setting up another commission to report in 6 months' time. Can you understand why that might actually anger Black Lives Matter activists rather than reassure them? And on the issue of the 12-metre rule, Health Minister Ed Argar said in the Commons today, the review into that rule will strike the right balance between public health and business. Is that how the government is now approaching things, as a trade-off between public health and the economy?
First of all, on the Commission, I think it's about setting a new positive agenda for change. Of course, we look at the work that was done by previous governments, but the Prime Minister's very clear on the direction of travel. We want to make sure we can translate some of the diagnosis of the challenges that we've got with actionable policies. But again, Beth, I just bring you back to as I mentioned earlier, in response to the first question that I took. We've seen a significant increase in rates of BAME 18-year-olds going to university. Since 2011, actually, if you look at children from all ethnic minority backgrounds, they're more likely to take most academic subjects at GCSE than they were before. We've got a big improvement in Black pupils entering course subjects at GCSE, even more so in relation to Asian pupils. We are making progress. So I do understand the restlessness for change. I think what the Prime Minister wants to make sure with this Commission is that we can come up with actionable policies, not just a diagnosis of the challenges we face. In relation to, I think you meant the 2-metre rule, not the 12-metre rule. The fact is, and I've heard Chris Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance explain it previously, indeed, at these podiums, is there's no magic to one or other particular measure. There will be different levels of risk, whether it's at 2 metres, 1.5 metres or 1 metre. But as we bring the incidence and the transmission rate down, and depending on the setting, it's something that can be looked at. So we're still going to make sure all of the policy judgments that we rightly as politicians take and are accountable for are underpinned by the science. And that's why we've tasked this review to look at it very carefully and to give us some up-to-date practical advice. And I think it's fair to say that based on the steps that we're taking, we've obviously had essential retail open for a while. With the new measures we're taking, what we're learning from international experience abroad, we're finding that the scientific basis is constantly evolving. So what we will do is make sure that we come up with the most up-to-date and the most comprehensive advice we can before we as policymakers take those judgment calls. Do you want to come back on any of that, Beth?
Well, just the only thing is, just in terms of the review, the Commission, lots of people have said today, actually, it's kicking the can down the road. You've had dozens of recommendations, and actually, there are things that need immediate action. Is everything just under review for another 6 months? And do you think that that's enough to persuade people to stop protesting?
Well, I think we understand why people are protesting, and let's remember that people are protesting because of the appalling case of George Floyd and the resonance that they feel that struck with them. We understand that. I thought it was a horrific case. We welcome the fact that prosecutions are being brought, that there's a federal review. And of course, UK is not the same as the United States. We've made progress in lots of ways. We don't have similar number or volume of BAME people who find themselves either being mistreated in custody or in detention. But we know that there are also concerns about the criminal justice system, which is why, as I mentioned, we're already following up on the Lamy review. We're acting on it already, collecting and publishing more data, better data, improving diversity in the prison workforce, working towards incorporating ethnicity when gauging performance of all of those key actors in the criminal justice system. So that work is already underway. And there isn't a silver bullet to this, and you say that why aren't we taking X or Y measures, that you didn't mention one in particular, and that's because this is difficult terrain. But I do think we should take stock of the progress that we've made over time. There was an Ipsos Mori poll out today which said that 66% of people say that the UK will be more tolerant, more diverse in 10 years' time. That's up from 50% in 2009. I think that tells something of the story. We are making progress. We've got every reason to be optimistic that this country will be open to everyone, and people can make the very best of their talents based on their potential, not the colour of their skin, their ethnicity, their faith. But clearly, we've still got work to do. So we'll do that painstaking work, even if it takes an extra 6 months, as you described, to make sure that we can really target policy measures where they can make the most difference. Thanks, Beth. And I think next is Jane Merrick from the I. Hi, Jane.
Thank you. The member of the public, Ollie, earlier asked a very good question about the alert level. And you said ultimately this was not something that was decided by politicians. It is true, isn't it, that there are only questions that only scientists can answer. And I'm just wondering why you don't have any scientists or medics next to you today. The weekly appearances by scientists and medics at these briefings has halved since the start of June. Why are the appearances by scientists diminishing?
I think you're right, Jane, to say that the judgment calls we make will inevitably be informed by the science. We're taking a lot of time and effort to get that right and to get the very best scientific information we can. As you'll know, you'll have heard Sir Patrick say it, you'll have heard Professor Chris Whitty say it, the science isn't set in stone, it's constantly evolving. So it is fluid, and that's why we need to constantly monitor it. In terms of presence at these press conferences, I mean, scientists and the chief and deputy medical officers will continue to come and attend these press conferences. I think it is also true to say that as we go down the roadmap and we start to talk about the changes we're making, whether it's to businesses or to schools or in other areas, we'll also bring other independent experts along and make sure that we can answer the full range of questions that people have. Jane, do you want to follow up on any of that?
Well, yes. I mean, it is quite a sort of a crossroads moment this week. And when we have sort of the shops opening up today, questions about the R value and so on. And do you not think it would be more reassuring to have a medic and a science at these daily briefings, which are still watched by millions of people? And there are some questions that you can't answer because you have to refer to the medics.
We haven't tried me on a question that I can't answer yet, but I'm happy to be proved wrong. But look, Jane, you're right to say that the scientists and the medical advisors are important. They'll continue to attend these press conferences, perhaps not on a daily basis. They've got a huge amount of other work to do. And ultimately, the politicians need to answer the judgment calls that we make based on the evolving science. So that's the approach we're taking. Jane, thank you very much. Liz Piper from Reuters.
Hi there.
Hiya.
Hi. In April, you said it wouldn't be business as usual with China after the coronavirus crisis. But even now, over Hong Kong and Huawei, it seems like the tide is already turning. How seriously do you take the warnings from Beijing that China could inflict substantial damage on the British economy?
Liz, I'm not sure I answered your question. We said it wouldn't be business as usual. That's partly about our approach and our diplomacy and our international relations with all countries after coronavirus. I don't think it will be business as usual abroad. It's certainly not at home. And look, in relation to China, there is obviously this fresh review on the 5G situation based on the evolving evidence that we've got. And in relation to Hong Kong, I think we've put out a very clear position, which is that if China follows through on this national security law, it would be in conflict, direct conflict, with the undertakings they've made under the Sino-UK Joint Declaration of 1984. So it doesn't feel to me like that's, strictly speaking, business as usual. But I think it's also true and right to say that we want to have a balanced approach with China. There are opportunities in that relationship, not just on trade, but also on COP26 and in climate change. Really important opportunities to shift the dial and work with China and other leading members of the international community on tackling climate change. That's particularly important to us and to the Prime Minister with COP26 scheduled for next year. At the same time, we're going to rigorously and robustly defend all of our values, as we will over Hong Kong, but also key things like infrastructure and other elements of our economy. Is your back on anything particular?
If I could, yes, please. I mean, it does seem like there's some kind of reset taking place at the moment, and you're trying to balance security concerns with economic prosperity. But I mean, as we go forward, what would you say to HSBC that has basically supported China's new security law in Hong Kong? And when will we actually see the results of the Huawei review?
Well, the review will be ready when it's we've got the full data back from the people that are conducting it, and NSC will need to look at it again. In relation to HSBC, look, ultimately businesses will make their own judgment calls, but let me just put it this way: we will not sacrifice the people of Hong Kong over the altar of banker bonuses, and we've made a historic commitment to the people of Hong Kong to protect their autonomy and to protect their freedoms, and more importantly, so has China. So we will hold them to those responsibilities, and I'll let businesses and banks make their own judgment call. But for us, this is a point of principle, and I think it's right we live up to our historic responsibilities and we stick up for the people and stand up for the people of Hong Kong at this very sensitive time. As you'll know, this isn't a foregone conclusion. China can step back from the brink, and we urge them to do so. And I've spoken to my Chinese opposite number, State Councillor, Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and we had a perfectly reasonable discussion, but we've made it very clear our position. Thanks, Liz. Mark Andrews from the Star. Mark.
Good evening, Foreign Secretary. Our local MP, Owen Patterson, has said that getting the 2-metre rule down to 1 metre is essential to kickstart our tourism and hospitality industries. I believe that when the Prime Minister announced the review recently, he said that the decision will be made, which it depends on the figures getting down enough. What precisely does this mean? What targets will need to be set, and how close are we to reaching them?
Yeah, thank you very much. You're right. The Prime Minister's commissioned a comprehensive review of the 2-metre rule. It will look at how it works in practice, the scientific evidence. We'll try and learn as much as we can from the international experience, which differs, of course. And in the meantime, I think our message is, as shops reopen, it is very important. And with the minority of scenes that we've seen today, it's important to emphasise that people must continue to keep 2 metres apart wherever possible and follow our stay alert guidance. We expect the review to be completed within the coming weeks, and we'll be able to say more then.
What are the specific targets? Is there a specific measure you've got in mind, and what reassurances can you give to people in the hospitality industry who are concerned that also with the quarantine policies in place and the restrictions on the Welsh border? What assurances can you give to people in the hospitality industry that they will be able to reopen?
Well, look, we've always said, I think, that in terms of bars, restaurants, and others in the hospitality sector, we would look at taking further measures. If you look back at the roadmap on the 11th of May, we said that at the earliest, the 4th of July. So the review of the 2-metre rule will inform that. But we want to get those bars, restaurants, all of those small businesses up and running as soon as we can do so. But it's got to be done in a safe and responsible way. So we do need to have the review. We do need to look at the latest evidence. We need to make sure we're gauging the progress that we've made. As I set out in the slides today, we've seen progress across pretty much the entire UK, across all regions, across all the nations, in getting a hold of the virus, bringing it down. If that continues, if we find that the measures that we've already taken, including today, can be done in a careful way, that we don't see the virus spike back up again, I think we'll be in the strongest position to give relief and reassurance to the hospitality sector. But we've got to make sure we proceed in a careful, sure-footed way. We don't want a second spike. That would be bad for public health, bad for the economy, including the small businesses that you've mentioned, and I think it would be bad for public confidence. So we're sticking to the roadmap, but we are making progress, and if we continue to do so, hopefully sooner rather than later, we can provide some reassurance and some further guidance to that sector. Thank you very much, and that brings an end to today's Downing Street press conference.